Greetings, people of Earth. Welcome back. My name is Jax. And today, have you ever met somebody and you just think, man, they have life on easy mode? They just go through life so effortlessly and they make it just look like no problem whatsoever. They seem to have everything just really together. And it's very frustrating, first of all. I think we all went to school with somebody who was kind of like, oh, we had a test today? Oh, I didn't study. And then when the test result comes back a week later, they aced it. They absolutely crushed it. Um, this is very frustrating to me for several reasons. And part of me, the wise part of me, understands that this is very much just from my perspective. You're looking at someone from one angle, and from that angle, everything looks great. But if you walked around them, you'd see, you know, sicknesses and difficulties and problems at home and all kinds of anxiety and worry and struggles. And, life does not leave any of us perfectly fine. We go through all the unexpected things. It doesn't matter if you're a billionaire. It doesn't matter if you are the son of a famous person or the child of a Nepo baby. It doesn't matter. Life is difficult. But for whatever reason, we're really fascinated by this look and this aesthetic of effortlessly living. And these people, especially on social media, you tend to have this perception that, man, this person is so crazy. Like they just do everything so well and they never seem to have a problem. And they go on a trip to Italy and get invited on someone's yacht, like that kind of vibe. And it's very frustrating for all of us because if you're living in your life, you are very well aware of all of the struggles and the difficulties and the problems you have. Life would be better if you did this or if this happened or if this worked out. So having this one-dimensional look at someone is very alluring. We're brought into it thinking, man, this person is just so perfect. How do I do this? And I will tell you some of the secrets to appearing like this, but you need to understand that it doesn't actually work in reality. You can give that perception of flawlessness on your social media when you meet people, and I think that's fine. I really don't think there's a problem with that as long as you are being real and genuine with people and you're not actively hiding things. You can choose to put your best foot forward, to look the best, dress for the part. You can choose to exhibit many of the traits that we see in this effortless living, but you first have to understand that it is a facade. It is a illusion that is used to protect yourself, to protect people who, don't want you to know all of the dirty secrets, the family skeletons in the closet. But it's definitely doable as long as you understand that you're still going to have to do the work. You're still going to have to go to therapy, get a job, work hard, work out, eat regularly, all of those things still apply. But to actually achieve this effortless aesthetic, I guess, because that's a good word for it, it's just on the surface. There isn't actually any concrete to it. And that's not to say you can't live a beautiful life and really love what you do, because you absolutely can. But there will always be elements of your life that you wish were better, you wish you were taller, you wish you were green-eyed, you wish you had all these things, and it's just not feasible. So with that being said, how do you achieve a flawless aesthetic or a look of perfection? And we'll talk a little bit about social media and real life and all of it. So the first thing is really identifying what you're looking for, because there's several different kinds of this flawless aesthetic that exist. There are the people that seem to just excel at everything, and that might take studying harder, that might take actually doing the work, figuring out strategies and learning strategies that work for you. Really, the list is kind of endless, but in order to kind of achieve that and embody that as best you can, again, it's not perfect, but if that's what you want to achieve, it takes doing the work. It takes actively figuring out your learning strategies. A good example of this is in school, in high school, in college, and in university. I really, really struggle with reading. and I have dyslexia. I have other learning disabilities associated with dyslexia. And so it's almost impossible for me to read a page of a textbook and know what it said. I'll get to the end of it and I'll be like, yep, I read every single word. But if you asked me what it said or, put it in my own thoughts, that's not happening. And very early on, thankfully, I figured out that if somebody spoke to me, I can remember what they say really well. I can, if that is the way that my brain picks it up, I realized early on that that's how I would have to make sure I memorize everything. And as a result, I was fortunate to find software that would read out my textbooks. I was fortunate to be in high school and a university that accommodated that. So for exams and things, I would have someone read the questions, read the blurb that I had to read, and then answer questions too. And they would also write things out, because I might sound somewhat eloquent at times, not always, but at times. However, if I try to write my thoughts into a coherent idea or concept on paper, it never comes out the way I want it to. And I end up sounding like a 6-year-old trying to talk about how seagulls are actually made of diamonds. So thankfully, I could listen to my textbooks. I could listen to the material that I was meant to read. That really worked for my memorization. And then I was able to dictate to a scribe who would then write out my concepts and ideas. And every single essay that I wrote in university was spoken. And I got to a point where I was really good at this. And if an essay was due the next morning, I could literally dictate it out word for word, including punctuation, and I would do very well. And that really saved my university career. So here we go. It's a great example. It looks like I'm flawlessly writing these essays and they're coming out very, very comprehensive and well written and well understood. And yet in reality, I had a learning disability and struggled really, really hard with all of this stuff. And it's only because I found the tools that worked for me that made everyone think like, how the heck is Jax doing this? Like, he hadn't written this essay that we had the entire semester to write until the last night, and then he aced it. And it's because I developed these learning strategies that made it look flawless. So that's kind of the concept of this whole video, is oftentimes the flawless things in life, the things we think, man, they're doing it so easily, have taken years of figuring out the nuances, figuring out how your brain works, figuring out what you want to put your best foot forward, how to show it, how to exemplify it in the most productive and healthy way. You can do this with almost anything. There will be a million fitness influencers telling you that, oh, you have to do this one exercise. You got to start doing a lemon juice and pepper shooter in the morning to spike your metabolism. You have to do this. You have to do this. Start using honey. Start taking creatine, like all these things. And at the end of the day, all of that advice can have some grains of truth in it, but your body is super unique and super diversified to who you are and from where you come from and all of these things. And so you have to figure out what actually works for you. A lot of people will say, oh, don't go for a run after your workout because you'll kill all the gains that you'll get. Some people, that's not true. Some people run and run and run and they're super fit. Some people swim and that works for them. And so you have to have the courage to try out all these things and figure out what fitness routine works for you. Because then once you figure that out, you make it look effortless. And just as a piano student really struggles and they're like, man, I wish I could just make this work. There's the 1 in a million person who will sit down at a piano and be able to perfectly play from ear. However, a lot of us need practice and we have to work so hard to make it look effortless. So I guess what I'm saying is that oftentimes when you see someone who is effortlessly living, there's a lot of work and luck and skill and persistence behind those attributes, Some things you cannot physically change in a healthy way, like your height. I've seen people do surgery to give them a few extra inches of height. But barring that extreme, physically dangerous procedure, you can't inherently change your height. But you can do things that make you a more interesting and beautiful human being without the need for external surgeries. And I mean, I'm not knocking you if you want to have a surgery or not or two, but the idea of, man, this person makes it look so effortless. Well, if you saw them in high school or if you saw them at 5 years old, it might be a very different story. And we can go in and out of this idea of being flawless. Some people peak in high school, some people peak at 40 or 50, and some people peak in their late 80s or 90s. And that is completely fine, but it really just takes this wisdom and understanding that everybody is a work in progress, and some of us have, in certain areas, figured out the process really, really well, and we have it to a fine tune. The final thing is the whole social media thing. This is probably the easiest area in which you can make yourself look flawless, and essentially it's just putting your best foot forward. A lot of social media people use Photoshop and alter their images. They, there's in LA famously, there's that fake private jet thing you can rent to make it look as though you flew on a private jet to your vacation or whatever. So you have to understand that social media will always give you this perception that everyone around you is flawless and that they have this perfect life figured out. Unfortunately, that's not the truth. A lot of it is Photoshop. A lot of it is fake. A lot of it is, trying to organize your photos and your videos and your reels into a cohesive story that paints you as this gorgeous, jet-setting debutante. And in reality, most of the time they're sitting at home eating Cheetos or, having a self-care day. So really try and understand that flawless living is very much an aesthetic. It's very much surface level, but there are genuine things you can do that make it seem to others in a one-dimensional way that, man, you've got it figured out. And so if you have areas in your life where you'd like to have that flawlessness, you'd like to be a beautiful piano player or a singer or any kind of skill or attribute, it's definitely possible. It's a goal you can set and be realistic about. But I really encourage you not to aspire to be a one-dimensional figure. You are multi-dimensional, and just as they talk about how a perfectly symmetrical face is kind of like it weirds humans out, we want a little bit of irregularity and weirdness, like a funny nose or whatever. It's the exact same thing. A 100% perfect individual, people are going to have a really hard time relating to that. People are going to have a really hard time understanding that as a concept because it doesn't exist. Once you get to know someone, you'll realize, oh, they might be gorgeous, but they have a temper, or they can't process milk. There's always these little factors that make us human. So much of these science fiction films and things will involve an alien or a robot or something trying to mimic humans, and they do everything perfectly. And the humans always figure this out. They figure out that they're being tricked. So take that as a good understanding for why you don't necessarily want to be flawless across the board. And it doesn't even matter if that's what you want, it's not possible. That's my tips and tricks and just thoughts about flawlessly living, having this aesthetic of perfection. You'll often see, highly religious people trying to live up to the religious perfection, and then a news article comes out about their family life or something like that, and you realize they are just human, and that is okay. That is fine. So, thank you for listening to this idea of flawless living, understanding that it's unrealistic, but there are areas in which you can seem flawless. And don't get me wrong, those areas can be really rewarding. It can be really rewarding to sit down at a piano and be able to play Moonlight Sonata or whatever you're into and see the looks of impressed amazement by people. Man, you made that look so easy. How'd you do that? It's like, oh, well, I took 8 years of piano, or I did this, or I did that. And that is always a beautiful, inspiring moment of human interaction when you make something look flawless and people crowd around and say, wow, that's impressive. So reach for the stars, understand that you'll never be perfect. None of us will. And that is so okay. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a beautiful, flawless day.